Tonight on Local Light with John Compton, Oregon book nominee Scott Sadil shares his lifelong passion for fly fishing and fiction. Whether he's on the water searching for steelhead, in the classroom educating Hood River High School students, or toiling away on his next book, Scott brings a thoughtful, practiced approach to his life here in the Columbia Gorge. That's all next on Local Light.
So Scott Sadil, thanks for coming on.
You're welcome.
I want to jump right into it with your past.
Okay.
Because you started out in Southern California, San Diego County, and kind of started to hone your skills on a surfboard, and also got introduced to fly fishing when you were living there, and then ended up coming up here. What was that transition like? How did that all happen?
I had been surfing a lot. I had been fishing a lot. But I wanted to get out of Southern California. I had traveled a lot while surfing, and it was a long distance to get out of town. And so I was looking at places where I might move, whether it was going to be the Rocky Mountains, the Northwest. Was looking for some way to get out of that sort of suburban sprawl. Just so happened I was married to a woman who was from Oregon. Her family had migrated up to Portland, and so after my second son was born, we moved up to Portland.
Okay. When was that?
That would have been 20 years ago.
20 years ago?
Yeah.
Okay. So you came up to Portland, and were you teaching in Portland? Because I understand you're an English teacher at Hood River High School. Mm-hmm. Were you teaching in Portland?
After I worked in construction, and I had been a carpenter, and that was always how I sort of supported my writing career.
Okay.
And then I got hurt, and I went back and got my master's at Lewis and Clark, decided I would go into teaching. I'd been writing, I knew literature, all those things, had a degree beforehand. And so I started teaching in Portland and had a job in a small private school, and eventually decided I was going to go into public schools, and a job came up in Hood River, and I said, this is a cool place, I'm going to show up.
This works for me.
Yeah.
What year was that?
That would have been 10 years ago.
10 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Yeah.
So since you've been in Hood River teaching English,
mm-hmm.
and you're also a professional writer
mm-hmm.
and author,
mm-hmm.
I guess those are kind of synonymous, but
right.
Where did the writing come in? Was that something that in your background when you were surfing waves
Yep.
and fly fishing that you thought about a lot, or you were doing at that time too?
I had started, writing and thinking of myself as a writer from, writing about sports in high school, I was a sports editor in college, and when I traveled, I did some writing, but wasn't really sure what that all meant. What is a writer? How does a writer make a living? Those sorts of things.
Were you selling it at that point?
Here and there, I would sell things to. I sold a lot of things to the San Diego Reader, and they were things. And the Reader was a real good venue, and they paid well. But it was one of those sort of tabloid-size weeklies that mm-hmm. was handed out to everybody. They paid good money, and I would write about things like surfing, like surf fishing, gardening, remodeling houses, just sort of first-person anecdotal stuff. And so I had done all that, and then I had started writing a lot about fly fishing in the surf, because that was sort of a new thing, and we were pioneers doing it.
Fly fishing in the surf.
In the surf. Okay, so we knew about fly fishing. There is a history of people fly fishing in the ocean. Mm-hmm. Key West, people fishing for bluefish and striped bass in places. And but in the Southern California surf and Baja California surf, there was here and there a few people who knew about that, but we didn't know those people, so we sort of figured it out on our own, and there was a lot of interest in those stories. I had actually finished my first book 3 years before I actually submitted it, because I was busy raising children and working as a carpenter. And when I got hurt, I found a cover letter to a publisher that I had written 3 years before, and I sent that. I finished the cover letter, sent it to the guy.
So the cover letter, you found it, and you had never submitted it.
I'd never even finished the cover letter.
Oh,
I had
okay.
sort of written about a paragraph and just stopped.
Why?
I don't know other than, please don't ever stop. When you're coming, I just think that I didn't really know how to do it. I didn't really know if this was the right place, and then just sort of the busyness, kind of like stopping a story.
Yeah.
You're writing something, you're not quite sure what to do, and then you move on to something else.
Okay.
I mean, I sent that letter, I finished the letter, sent it in within a week, the guy calls and said, we'll publish that book.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you think to yourself, why did I wait so long?
Yes.
You did?
And I have other times in my life when I've thought that. And if there's anything that we know about creative work, it's
don't stop.
Don't stop, don't hesitate, continue to try. Things will open up and if they don't, at least you have put yourself out there. You went through, you made the attempt.
Right. So when you had that first book published, what was the name of it?
It's called Angling Baja.
Okay.
And it was sort of, I call it a memoir, even though about learning to fly fish in the surf.
All right.
I mean, basically the whole journey that we took from being young guys who knew how to surf fish in traditional ways, cast out bait, let it sit there, okay, something comes along, grab it, at the same time that we were surfing. And so this sort of marriage between those two ideas, we could catch these fish on flies.
And that's kind of how it started.
And that's sort of what the piece was. And so it followed that story. And even to where the publisher said, well, why is this story, this one chapter, all about your surfing career? And I said, because you have to understand that was so integral to us becoming fly fishers in the surf. Because all the things we knew about from surfing, the way the waves break, the way the currents are, the when the fish are there, all of that was part of what our success was about.
Really?
And knowing all of that makes you capable of finding the fish and knowing where to fish and knowing all this stuff that goes into that sport that we were doing.
So you had a real advantage. You were in the right place at the right time, in a sense, doing the right thing for this fly fishing to take on.
Absolutely. And of course, there was this growing market because the industry liked this idea that there was this whole new market where we could have people take up fly fishing, and they didn't have to live in Montana, didn't have to live in those places. Yeah, there were people in California who fly fished in the Sierra Nevada, which is how I learned and everything, little streams and all this. But the notion that you had this long coastline and that was good, viable sport for fly fishers.
Right. And actually, until being, briefed on you and reading some about you, and I've never really been a fisherman. I did some as a kid and things like that, but I never would have thought Southern California and fly fishing, like you said earlier. You think Montana or Oregon, but never the coasts of Southern California.
Right, and now it's huge for all the sport fish that exist in Baja, for example. So all those fish that people used to go down there and have big game rods and all this, there are fly fishers casting flies and hooking those fish.
Really?
And that's cool.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk to you when we come back from the break a bit more about the correlation of surfing and fly fishing and how that's parlayed into what you do now and some of the books. I understand you have a book that's up for an award now.
Yep.
So we'll continue the conversation right after the break. Stick with us.
Next,
there has been this sort of movement with the fishing, with the fly fishing, that there are stories to be told about that, and there's an audience that exists.